everybody, let's talk about synthesis writing. So the first type of synthesis that you're going to complete is the explanatory synthesis. So what is that? What do you need to do? Here's what you need to do. So a synthesis is when we interpret or use information from two or more sources. So instead of doing single source papers like analysis or critique or summary, synthesis says we're going to use two sources or more. And then your job as the reader is to understand what the relationships are between the information in those different sources. Okay, so summary, critique, and analysis are very important skills to be able to do as part of synthesis. Now, why? Why would that be? Well, first of all, you have to know what the articles say, right? Before you can decide the relationships between the information. So summary is really important. Critique is also really important because when you're synthesizing information, you want to make sure that you're getting fair information for both sides. So if I'm going to be discussing two sides to the issue and one of my articles for my synthesis is very credible, but one is not credible, then the information I'm going to choose to take from one of the articles is not going to help build my argument. So critique is very important because you don't want to synthesize bad information. And then it leaves us unsure which source we should use if our sources don't agree. And critique will, the skill of critique will help us as educated researchers know which of the two sources we should choose and depend on. So critique is very important. Third, analysis, because if you remember, when we're doing analysis, what we want to be able to do is understand how do the two sources present a single idea. So much like writing the analysis paper, what I'm doing is I'm looking for the topic I'm writing about. I'm looking at how these two different sources approach my topic. And so I'm focusing only on my topic and what my sources have to say specifically about my topic and understanding how they present those ideas differently. So analysis says, I'm looking for these ideas in my sources. Synthesis says, now let's look at what this source says about my topic and what this source says about my topic. Let's see how they come together and whether they're the same or whether they're different. Okay, so analysis is the ability to pull information from a source about my topic. Synthesis is then being able to take those facts from those sources and blend them together. Okay, so you have to do those basically at the same time. And you've done this before and probably didn't know that's what you were doing. So, the thing with writing an 8 to 10 page research paper, though, is you have to be able to do this in a very complex, multi-level way as a writer, because not only are you collecting information specifically about your topic, you're really trying to collect information for all of the subtopics that you're focusing on about your topic. So, if I'm writing about running and maybe I write about why everybody should run a marathon in their lifetime, well, I'm not just focusing on running a marathon. Maybe I'm focusing on the emotional benefits to running. Okay, so that's really my topic. And then I find two sources that talk about the emotional benefits. Well, my job is first to summarize those. What do the two articles say? Do they actually both cover my topic? And then can I critique them? So are they both credible sources? Because if one of them is and one of them isn't, that's a problem, because then that's confusing to my reader. And then I need to analyze that. So then I need to really dig into each of my sources and pull out exactly the information I need that has to do with the emotional benefits of running a marathon. So maybe it talks about the emotional benefits of running in the article, but I'm focusing on a marathon. So I need to pick out just those specific facts that have to do with that one very specific topic. Then the synthesis part is, okay, I take these facts about the emotional benefits of running a marathon from this source, and I take those same kinds of facts from this source, and now synthesis says, now let me put them together and see where they agree and disagree. Okay, so the analysis is the part where I'm digging through my sources and pulling up the stuff that I need. Synthesis says, okay, now I have all these puzzle pieces. Let me stick it together to make it a puzzle. Okay, so that's what we're doing when we're writing synthesis. There are two types of synthesis writing. The first is explanatory. The second is argument. So explanatory is just explaining, just giving more information about the topic. Argument is then proving a point about the topic. Okay, so be sure you understand the wording of the assignment so that you know what you're going to do or what you need to do. The one we're going to focus on today is explanatory. So its purpose is to explain in an objective manner. The thesis for this paper is just a discussion of the overall main idea of your topic. That's it. Okay, so what are you going to do? You're going to take notes on your sources. You're going to highlight the information that you need, and then you need to outline so that you understand how you're going to fit all these pieces together. So you're going to analyze your sources for the information you need. Then you're going to outline it so that you can figure out how to fit it all together. That's the synthesis part. Okay. Remember that in synthesis, you want to make sure that you combine ideas. Okay. You're not going to give me one paragraph that tells me all of the facts from source one and then all of the facts from source two. That is not synthesis. That is merely summary. Okay. All you're doing is telling me, here's what this source says about it. Now, here's what this source says about it in two separate paragraphs. That's not what you're doing in this paper, because that's really just two summary paragraphs put together. That's not a synthesis. So in a synthesis, I have to put them together. Okay. So I have to take facts from this source and facts from this source and put them together in one paragraph together. So keep that in mind. We're blending. So here's an example. The Civil War was fought not for reasons of moral principle, but for reasons of economic necessity. Okay, so if I had to write an explanatory synthesis about this, I would choose one side or the other. So maybe I would talk about economic necessity. Okay, and then I would say, all right, so you can see how explanatory may be part of an argument, because really this prompt is argument. But I have to be able to explain the two sides first before I can argue them. So explanatory works into argument synthesis because I have to be able to explain my topic before I can argue my topic. Okay. So what am I going to do explanatory? Well, I'm going to gather my sources. I'm going to highlight the information that pertains to my topic. So maybe I found all these sources about the Civil War, but I'm focusing on economic necessity. So I'm talking about the economics of why we went to war. Okay, so I need to find facts and information about, monetarily, economically, why did we go to war? Well, we could talk about the fight between urban and agricultural, right? These two different ways of life that conflicted. I mean, we had the North that was much more urban and business, fighting against the South that was much more agricultural. Okay. So then what's my purpose for writing? Well, I'm writing to explain, not to argue, right? What am I explaining? I'm explaining the economics necessity of going to war. Okay. And so that's the direction then for my research. So then what I'm going to do is look at my sources and decide how the pieces of information from my sources relate to each other. Do they agree? Do they disagree? Do they offer different kinds of viewpoints? How am I going to be able to put these together? Okay. Then the thesis is, because I've looked at these points, what is the overall point I'm going to make? And then I want to create an overall idea and an outline of how I'm going to blend the two sources together. Okay. So when do we use this kind of writing? Well, anytime you have to use more than one source to explain something. You do this to make sure you have accurate information. So I want to make sure, because if I only rely on one source, how do I know my information is correct? If I have two sources, it's much more likely that my information is correct, because if they agree with each other, then I probably have good information. Okay. If I have two sources and one of them says one thing and one of them says another, then I need to start asking myself as the researcher, which one do I choose? That's where critique comes into play. Okay. So, and anytime I'm explaining a point and not arguing a point. All right. So here are some things not to do, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what you should do. Do not use all of one source, then use all of a second source. That's not what we're doing. You need to blend. Please do not forget citations. Each time you switch sources, so even inside of a paragraph, your citations start over again. So make sure you keep that in mind. be sure to continuously cite. Anytime you switch paragraphs, they also start over. So be sure to continue doing your citations. Please do not leave out a thesis. Do not make awkward sentences that don't make your research flow well. You should never have a fact or piece of information that you have not introduced in some kind of way, or you do not explain immediately following. It should just not be you vomiting facts into a page. That's not synthesis. You need to give us the facts, be sure they flow well into sentences, and then be sure you explain them. Okay? Do not forget to quote if you use exact words. The citation is not enough. The citation just says that I borrowed the information. The quotation marks said I borrowed it exactly. So if you use an author's exact words, be sure you use quotation marks. You should do this sparingly. Please do not just summarize your 2 sources. It's not what we're doing here. You're actually making a point. Okay. Please do some pre-writing. It becomes very obvious who has done pre-writing and who hasn't, because this paper runs off the rails really quickly. Because you're now managing multiple sources and making a point, you're explaining or teaching us something, it needs to stay focused and it needs to flow well. You need good transitions. We need to see the connections between your ideas, so you need to pre-write. So be sure you do that, okay? All right, so what exactly are you going to do? Well, for this paper, what you need to do is you need to take at least 2 of your sources, and what I want you to do is explain a major idea from your overall research topic to me. So again, if I was going to talk about running a marathon, maybe one of the things I would focus on is training. Okay, so maybe I'm going to write my explanatory synthesis on training for a marathon. Okay. And so I have a couple of sources that talk about running marathons. And so then what I'm going to do is look at my sources and see, where do my 2 sources talk about training for the marathon? They probably talk about lots of things about marathons, right? But one aspect of a marathon is training. So you're going to focus on one aspect of your topic, and then you're going to explain it to us, okay? So maybe my thesis that I'm making is that there are one of the hallmarks of training for a marathon is double-digit mile weeks, some very long and short runs. Okay, so maybe that's my thesis, just something really simple, explaining what training for a marathon is. That's what your thesis is going to be, is almost like a definition or defining sentence. So training for a marathon requires, running multiple days a week, short and long distance, and keep it at that. Then I'm going to then talk about in the paper, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to answer those questions. I'm going to answer the who, what, when, where, why questions. Okay, so when I'm explaining, I want to make sure that I do that. So I'm going to say, okay, who needs to do these things? Well, before you're ready to run a marathon, you really need to have run some other distances beforehand. You're going to really struggle if you just one day decide, I've never run in my life and I'm going to run a marathon this week. So a person training for a marathon should be somebody who's already used to running some significant long distance. I had already run, 7 half marathons before I decided I was going to run a full. So that's who. And then I would pull sources, pull facts from my sources that talked about, what kind of pre-training you need to have had before you're ready to run a marathon. And then, what? Well, what is training for a marathon? Well, training for a marathon, from this source says, well, it's 16 weeks. And this one also says, oh, look, it's 16 weeks. Or maybe this one says it's 12 weeks. So it could be anywhere from 12 to 16 weeks is a training cycle for a marathon. Okay. And so I just go through those questions: who, what, when, where, why. Typically those can be multiple paragraphs. So maybe who is a paragraph, what is a paragraph, when is a paragraph, so on. And the why question answers your so what. Why would somebody train for a marathon? Of course, a lot of people have that question. Why in the world would anybody train for a marathon? And the answer is because only, I think it's only 1% of the population has run a marathon. And I want to be part of the 1% of the population because I want to do hard things and be that oddball. And so, training for a marathon was a way to teach myself to do hard things. And that so what, that why we care about your topic, that's really how you want to conclude this paper. Okay, so why does this topic matter? So keep that in mind. But you want to tell me who, what, when, where about your topic. And then the why really should be your conclusion. Why do we care? Why does it matter? Okay, so need at least 2 sources. You need to have a thesis that basically defines and tells us what your key term is. Okay, so for me, I'm not just talking about running a marathon. The key term I chose was training. Okay, so that's one element of my overall topic of marathons. So, I'm going to tell you about, what training for a marathon is. Then in my body paragraphs, I'm going to do who, what, when, where, okay, even how, and then the why becomes my conclusion. That's so what, why does this matter? Then in those paragraphs, I'm going to pull facts from my 2 sources and put them together inside the paragraph to tell you who. Then I'm going to pull sources from pull facts from both of my sources and put them together to tell you when. Okay, does that make sense? So that's what we're trying to do here. Answer those questions, explain our topic, and use information from 2 sources put together so that it builds my credibility, because it shows that I have chosen sources that agree with each other, which means I'm not giving you bad information. Okay, so that's the idea. That's what you're going to be doing. So you're going to write a synthesis with 2 sources for your homework. All right. Let me know if you have any questions. Talk to you later. Bye.